The night of August 8th, 1963, was supposed to be a routine run for the Royal Mail. The train was the fast traveling from Glasgow to London, a rolling vault carrying the weekend's takings from the Scottish banks. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 a.m., and the English countryside was swallowed in a thick, silent fog. But as the train approached a lonely stretch of track at Bridego Bridge, the green signal suddenly flickered and turned red. The driver, a veteran named Jack Mills, did what any honest man would do. He pulled the brake. He thought it was a mechanical failure. He thought he was just waiting for a clear track. He didn't know that 15 men were crouching in the tall grass, wearing masks and brandishing iron bars. He didn't know that the signal hadn't malfunctioned. It had been hijacked with a couple of 6-volt batteries and a leather glove. And he certainly didn't know that in the next 30 minutes, he would become a footnote in the most audacious heist in the history of the British Empire. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a military operation carried out by a gang of gentlemen thieves who thought they were smarter than Scotland Yard. They were about to walk away with £2.6 million, over $60 million in today's money. For this gang, the mistake wasn't a dropped gun or a witness's face. It was a board game. Welcome to Carlton's Stories. Today, we're looking at the heist that redefined the word mastermind. Grab a seat. This is the Great Train Robbery. Every great crime starts with a whisper. For this one, the whisper came from a man known only as the Ulster Man. To this day, his true identity is one of the most debated secrets in the criminal underworld. He was an insider, someone deep within the Royal Mail who knew exactly which trains carried the high-value packages. He reached out to a man named Bruce Reynolds. Now, Reynolds wasn't your typical street thug. He was a dandy, a lover of jazz, fine wine, and fast cars. He viewed crime as an art form, a chess match against society. When the Ulster Man told him that the Glasgow to London train on August 8th would be carrying an unusually large amount of cash due to a bank holiday in Scotland, Reynolds didn't just see a payday. He saw his masterpiece. But Reynolds couldn't do it alone. He needed a crew of specialists. He brought in Douglas "Goody" Gordon, a man who could handle the logistics. He brought in Buster Edwards, a former boxer who provided the muscle. And he brought in Ronnie Biggs, a small-time crook who would eventually become the most famous face of the gang. In total, there were 15 men. They called themselves the South Coast Raiders. They spent months planning, scouting the location at Sears Crossing, and even buying a remote farmhouse called Leatherslade Farm, located about 27 miles from the robbery site, to use as their cool-down spot. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. You can't stop a speeding train by force, so you have to make the train stop itself. In the early hours of August 8th, the gang moved onto the tracks. They covered the green light of the signal with a leather glove and connected a battery to the red light. When Jack Mills saw the red glow, he brought the massive diesel engine to a screeching halt. His co-driver, David Whitby, climbed down from the cab to find a trackside telephone to call the signal box. He found the wires had been cut. Before he could turn around, 2 men grabbed and told him, "If you shout, you're a dead man." Back in the cab, Jack Mills was confronted by a masked man. Mills was a tough guy. He fought back. In the scuffle, he was struck over the head with a metal bar. It was the only major act of violence in the entire heist, but it was a blow that would haunt the gang and Jack Mills for the rest of their lives. The gang had brought their own train driver, a man they'd recruited specifically for this job. But there was a problem. The modern diesel-electric locomotive was too complicated for him. He couldn't move it. The robbers were forced to drag a bleeding, semi-conscious Jack Mills back to the controls. With a gun to his head, the man who had spent his life serving the railway was forced to drive his own train to Bridego Bridge, where the gang's trucks were waiting. What happened next was a whirlwind of precision. The train consisted of 12 carriages, but the gang was only interested in one, the high-value package carriage. Usually, there were only a few £100,000 on board. But because of the holiday, the carriage was packed with 128 sacks of cash. We're talking about old-fashioned, large-denomination notes. The weight alone was staggering. The sorters inside the carriage didn't even know what was happening until the doors were smashed open. The gang formed a human chain, tossing the heavy sacks from the train down to the waiting trucks. They worked in total silence, the only sound being the grunting of men and the thud of money hitting the truck beds. In just 30 minutes, they cleared out 120 of the 128 sacks. They left the last 8 behind simply because they ran out of time. They had a schedule to keep. As they sped away into the night, Bruce Reynolds looked at his watch. They were exactly on time. They had just pulled off the biggest robbery in history, and they hadn't fired a single shot. They drove through the back roads of Buckinghamshire, listening to the police scanners. The airwaves were silent. The police didn't even know the train had been stopped yet. The South Coast Raiders arrived at Leatherslade Farm, unloaded the money into the cellar, and began to celebrate. This is where the story shifts from a thriller to a tragedy of errors. The gang planned to stay at the farm for several weeks until the heat died down. They had plenty of food, plenty of beer, and enough cash to buy a small country. But they got bored, and they got arrogant. To pass the time, they started playing Monopoly. But they didn't use the fake paper money that comes with the game. They used the real cash. They were literally playing Monopoly with thousands of stolen British pounds. They also spent their time drinking, eating, and laughing about how they'd outsmarted the old Bill. But outside the farm, the world was exploding. Scotland Yard had launched the biggest manhunt in British history. They knew about the farm, they just didn't know which farm. When the gang heard on the radio that the police were searching every building within a 30-mile radius, they panicked. They decided to split the money and vanish. Bruce Reynolds told everyone to wipe the place clean of fingerprints. He even gave them money to hire a professional cleaner to burn the house down after they left. But the cleaner took the money and ran. He never showed up. When the police finally arrived at Leatherslade Farm, they found a gold mine of evidence. They found the empty mailbags. They found the food wrappers. And most importantly, they found the Monopoly board. The gang had been so careful during the robbery, wearing gloves and masks. But while playing games at the farm, they had relaxed. Scotland Yard technicians found a perfect set of fingerprints on the Monopoly box, on a cider bottle, and on a dish detergent bottle. The gentlemen thieves had literally handed the police their identities on a silver platter. One by one, the gang members were hunted down. Most were arrested within months. The British public, initially charmed by the Robin Hood vibe of the heist, turned cold when they learned about the injury to Jack Mills. The trial was a sensation. The judge, wanting to send a message to the surging criminal underworld of the 60s, handed out staggering sentences. Most of the men got 30 years. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Ronnie Biggs, who had only been a minor player, escaped from Wandsworth prison 15 months into his sentence. He fled to Paris, got plastic surgery, then moved to Australia, and finally to Brazil. For 36 years, Biggs lived as a fugitive in Rio de Janeiro, a living middle finger to the British government. He became a celebrity, recording songs with the Sex Pistols and selling "I Robbed the Great Train" t-shirts to tourists. Bruce Reynolds, the mastermind, stayed on the run for 5 years, living in Mexico and Canada before eventually being caught when he returned to England, broke and lonely. The money? Most of it was never recovered. Out of the £2.6 million, only a small fraction was found. It's buried in gardens, hidden in Swiss banks, or spent on the sun-drenched beaches of Rio. The Great Train Robbery remains a peak moment in criminal history because it represents the end of an era. It was the last time a group of men could outrun the law with nothing but a good plan and a fast truck. Today, with GPS, digital banking, and facial recognition, a heist like this is impossible. But it also serves as a warning. Bruce Reynolds and his crew thought they were the smartest men in the room. They planned for the signals, the weight of the bags, and the getaway routes. But they didn't plan for their own human nature. They didn't plan for the boredom of a rainy afternoon at a farmhouse and a game of Monopoly. In the end, the greatest heist in history wasn't brought down by a master detective. It was brought down by a 10-shilling board game and a few fingerprints left in the dust. Thanks for watching this deep dive into the vault of history. Here at Carlton Stories, we believe the best stories are the ones that remind us how fragile our plans really are. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button.